Welcome to Americans for Limited Government live stream. Today, what we want to talk about is basically what's the latest with the Biden vaccine mandate. It's being challenged in the courts, it's being challenged in Congress. Congress has been doing amendments to different bills, then voting on the bills themselves, and now there's some other measure they're going to vote on this week. So there's a lot going on with the fight to stop Biden's vaccine mandates. So, Rick, can you kind of tell us where we're at? What's the latest? Well, what's happening this week?
Sure. Right now, we have all of the vaccine mandate cases are going to be consolidated into the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. That's actually it's a pretty good appeals court in terms of its conservative versus liberal leaning. So that's a good piece of news in terms of the federal court level. The Biden administration has already had announced that they're not going to enforce the OSHA mandate until the courts give it the okay. But they are fighting like crazy for it, and they are trying to pressure companies into enforcing it on their behalf. Good point of good news. The United Auto Workers and the big three automakers is what they're still called. I don't know why, but the Chrysler, GM, and Ford agreed that they would not impose the vaccine mandate on those workers. And so it is that's a pretty good step in terms of mitigating some of the pressure that Biden is putting on big companies and labor unions to try to enforce this mandate without it being legal or constitutional.
But so, Rick, just to ask you though, those big three automakers say they're not going to enforce this OSHA mandate, but they could face up to $14,000 in fines from the federal government for each violation. So how is it that they're just going to ignore the OSHA mandate?
Well, they came to an agreement with their union, and in terms of how they're going to handle it, and effectively, if they get a fine, they'll sue, and so that's so they have contracts, employee contracts. The question becomes is much of their workforce are not unionized, and so the question becomes what happens with the white collar workers at those places. And obviously, the hope is that they will have the same perspective for the white collar workers as they do for the blue collar workers who are represented by the union. It's a multi-step process, and it would be really bad PR for Joe Biden to be suing one of the big three automakers or all three of them to try to get the vax mandate imposed with the workforce heavily in places like Michigan and Pennsylvania and Ohio, places where there are a lot of union workers, and are up for grabs in terms of whether or not he's going to be able to win re-election. So high impact states are impacted, and the big three stepping up that way with the union is a good sign. Now let's talk a little bit about what's happening in Congress, because there's a lot of stuff going on. First of all, last week the Republicans essentially passed on a huge opportunity where the funding bill for the government was being voted on, and the Republicans allowed that bill to pass without having a true vote, a real fight over funding the vaccine mandates. There was an amendment vote that was up, and 28 Republicans voted for the amendment to eliminate the vaccine mandate from the bill. And that means there were about 19 who did not, and there were 3 who weren't there. So you've got to, right now the Republicans do not have the votes to filibuster a funding bill that funds the vaccine mandate. They need 41 minimum. They don't have that yet. They'll get another chance in mid-February when the funding bill comes back up. But in the meantime, they don't have the means to do that. And so the next month and a half are going to be all about building support and getting Republicans to start getting a backbone on this issue. Now, one thing that's happening, and Catherine, you brought up the Congressional Review Act that is going on. So, did you want to talk a little bit about that?
So, right, Senator Mike Braun of Indiana has all 50 Republicans in the Senate have co-sponsored the Congressional Review Act, and this is just a resolution. It that says we disapprove of a specific, federal regulation, and in this case, it would be the OSHA mandate affecting private employers. Anyone with 100 or more employees.
Right.
They have all 50 Republicans, and they need just one Democrat. And today, Senator Joe Manchin came out saying, hey, look, I don't support these mandates on private employers, so I may support this Congressional Review Act, and it's supposed to come up for a vote this week. Now, what would be the impact of that if they were to get Joe Manchin on board? It still has to get through the House and then to the president's desk. So tell me about that.
Well, it's an interesting opportunity to try to peel some Democrats off. Kristen Sinema is talking about potentially voting for a Congressional Review Act disapproval on the vax mandate, particularly on the OSHA vax mandate. I know that Senator Daines from Montana is saying he's going to talk to his counterpart, Senator Tester, who is a Democrat, and trying to get him to vote in favor of rescinding that OSHA mandate. The way the law works is that Congress can make a motion of disapproval for a regulation within a certain amount of time. If that motion of disapproval is passed by the House and passed by the Senate, doesn't have to be any particular order, but if passed by the House and passed by the Senate, then it goes to the president's desk and the president has to sign it, or the president has a choice to sign it. If the president vetoes it, then you have to override the veto, and there's not the votes to do that. So the likelihood that Joe Biden is going to sign a Congressional Review Act claim by Congress to rescind a regulation that he's pushed through is very, very limited. The CRA, as it's called, is generally useful in a couple of ways, but the only time it's really been used with any great effect have been multiple times when Republicans get a majority get the presidency and a majority of the House and the Senate, and they go back and they look at regulations that the previous administration put into place over the last 6 to 8 months and have the capacity to vote those down and say, we don't want those regulations, and they strip them out. And so that's something which Republicans have done both in 2017 and then back in, 2001, when under George W. Bush, there was a labor law that was passed by under Bill Clinton that they managed to CRA and defeat and take it out in the first few months of the Bush administration. So those are the only times when it's actually been effective, because ultimately you need all three layers of government and in order to make it work.
Okay. And then two other things that I know are happening right now in Congress. Well, really three big things that have to happen before the end of the year. Democrats are still trying to get their Build Back Better bill. And then the debt ceiling is going to have to be raised again in the middle of December. And right now, the thing that's at the top of their desk, pile of papers on their desks, is the National Defense Authorization Act. So those are opportunities for Republicans to try to defund the vax mandate, perhaps, each one of those, because all of them are sort of these must-pass bills for the Democrats. So is there any strategy there at any one of these 3 points that are going to come up in the next month?
Yeah, the National Defense Authorization Act, also known as NDAA, is a piece of legislation that authorizes a lot of the military, essentially, the defense side of the budget. And it is traditionally had things like this inserted into it. Now, for instance, if Congress wanted to say we don't want this to apply to military and military contractors, it would be directly applicable, and they could say, okay, that's the price of voting for something else in that bill. That bill's got a lot of extra problems in it. There are there's some pretty sweeping changes that the left is trying to do in that bill. For one thing, they're attempting to make it so women have to register for the draft if there is and make women eligible for the draft, which is a pretty gigantic cultural change, which is being kind of done under the radar because there's not a big debate on it like you normally expect, and there's not a real discussion about it. It's just something they've shoved in there, and as a result, there's a lot of concern about it. But the fact is, there's not much talk about it. So there's things like that are in there that are giving a lot of people heartburn and making it very difficult for people to vote for the NDAA, which truthfully is normally a slam dunk. But yes, they could put an end to the vax mandate as broadly as they want to, but they'd probably restrain it to defense and military contractors if they were going to do that. So that's one, and it's going to be a big fight. And quite honestly, I don't know how that fight's going to turn out because there are so many different social policies that are being pushed through the NDAA that's been constructed by the left that a lot of the normal coalition is going away. The hawks who always want more money for the Pentagon are really questioning that because of a lot of the strings that are put. So it's going to get so there's going to be a lot of movement. There'll be a lot of compromise, and quite honestly, it's going to be inside the Beltway game, and there's no telling how what's going to happen. I do know they're going to pass it at some point.
Okay. And Rick, you wrote a piece today in the Daily Torch, sort of revisiting the jobs numbers that came out on Friday. What you heard from most of the media, and myself included, we were all hearing like, oh, it was a disappointing report. The numbers were, nowhere near what Wall Street was expecting. But you had a different take. Explain to me why you think that jobs report really wasn't as bad as the media was portraying it.
Okay, once again, everything's more complicated than it seems in DC, but there are actually two jobs reports, okay? And so people need to understand that the focus that the media was giving and Wall Street was giving was towards something called the Establishment Survey. And the Establishment Survey is a survey of businesses to find out how many jobs they created in the last month. And the number that the jobs that were created were about 205. I guess it was 210,000 jobs in the month of November. Now, and the Wall Street had expected that number to be double that. And as a result, all the algorithms that trigger how the spending goes went haywire, and Wall Street dropped when the number came out because it's different what they expected. And the reason they look at those job creation numbers is because they are looking at it from a traditional kind of matrix, and you need to create so many jobs to lower the unemployment rate, to bring people back into the economy and the like. And so these are traditional jobs where an employer goes out and hires people. Here's why I really discounted that. It's because on the other side, first of all, it didn't meet expectations. So that just means economists got it wrong. So economists got it wrong, and so now it's they put a big headline and it says, "Oh my gosh, it's terrible." We got it wrong, and so consequently it means the economy is terrible. Now, let's just be clear about something. Joe Biden's policies are a disaster. Joe Biden's policies have nothing to do with anything that's good that's happening in the economy. But let's talk about something that's good that's happening in the economy. I'll tell you why it's good, A, and B, and how it showed up in the jobs report and how it was ignored and why it is a total repudiation of the Biden and the left policies. This past month in November, 1.1 million more Americans got jobs. 1.1 million Americans got jobs. Since July, we've seen about 3 million Americans, a little over 3 million Americans, more Americans employed. Now, that's a huge number. That's a massive number. The normal numbers are about 110 to 100 to 200,000. So that gives you some scale in terms of how big that number is. And it's all basically gaining back people back into the economy, back into the workforce who were previously out of it after COVID. And so it's still trying to create more, get people back in the workforce. So this is really pretty simple. We have a situation where in June, a number of Republican governors said, we are not going to continue paying people to stay at home. And so they stopped giving the extra federal subsidy to people who are unemployed in their states to stay home. And guess what? The unemployment rate in those states dropped. People got jobs, and you saw, and of the top 10 lowest unemployment states, all 10 have Republican governors. So that's what you're looking at. You've got states that right now are under 4% unemployment, and the top 10 states in terms of the lowest unemployment rates are all Republican governors who got rid of paying people not to work, the federal program to pay people not to work. The Democrats refused to do that. Joe Biden refused to do that. He came out and said, well, just pay people more money if you want to come work. And that was his solution. And so what we saw, once those states stopped doing that, we started seeing people coming back to work in those states and elsewhere, but primarily in those states. In September, that federal subsidy went away. It expired, it died a natural death. Okay, it wasn't renewed, and so it's gone. And lo and behold, in November, you're looking at October and November, you have, in those 2 months, you get about 1.5 million more people entering the workforce and getting jobs. Not just entering the workforce, but actually getting jobs. So, folks, here's the lesson. If you pay people not to work, they won't work. And if you don't pay them not to work, they'll go get a job. And that is a lesson we learned through the jobs numbers. It affirms the Republican policies that incentivizing people not to work is a failure. It will always fail. And it is a total diss to the Democrat policies that said the economy is so bad we have to pay people not to work. Fact is, we got about 10 million jobs that are unfilled in this country. We don't have enough workers to fill those jobs, and to subsidize people not to work in that kind of circumstance is not just stupid, it's fatally stupid. But those job numbers were great. They were great because people are getting back to work, and 1.1 million more people working means they're paying taxes. It means they're doing things that are productive. There's a virtuous cycle that starts to occur. And if Joe Biden just doesn't mess it up, gets out of the way, stops his war on energy, for instance, stops the spending, the inflationary cycle is occurring as a result. If he just gets out of the way, our economy will fully recover to the economy we had during the Trump administration in 2019 and up to February 2020. If Joe Biden continues to get in the way through aggressive regulatory and other actions and his war on energy, then you expect this recovery to stall, because the cost of hiring employees will be too high, at which point employers will automate, they'll do other things, and we will mess up one of the absolute opportunities to restore the best labor economy in my lifetime, which is what we had during the Trump years.
And Rick, what do you think about the labor numbers? Are they capturing all of those workers that are leaving the 9-to-5 jobs and they're entering the gig economy as independent contractors, self-employed entrepreneurs? Where are they showing up in those numbers?
They show up in the household survey, which is the unemployment survey, because if you call up, it's a survey. All this is a survey, folks. Every month they do a survey about 50,000 people, different randomly selected people, and they do that survey. And then they know how many people are in different segments. And so they even it out with some statistical evening that they do to make it so you get the right mix of how many people are actually in the economy. But ultimately, it's a survey. And when people are asked, do you have a job? They will say yes. And the answer, because they're driving for Uber, they're doing, various other things. They might have 3 jobs doing various other things, but they're self-employed. And so, yes, I have a job. Now, on the establishment survey, that does payrolls, they aren't on anybody's payroll. They're independent contractors. So consequently, the payroll survey has become much less, is really becoming a little, in my opinion, a little bit out of touch with what's really going on in the economy. It's really geared towards a 1950s workplace as opposed to a 21st century model of a lot of independent contractors. And that's why when Wall Street goes all nuts about the establishment survey, I kind of look at it and say, what I care about isn't the establishment survey. What I care about is, are people working? Are people unemployed? Because that's the predictor on where people are in life and their thinking. And are they upset? Are they sanguine in some way? Are they being able to fulfill their hopes and dreams? Mm-hmm. An employer having a bunch of jobs, offering a bunch of jobs or creating jobs doesn't measure that. The unemployment side does. And once again, if Joe Biden doesn't mess it up, and he's doing everything he can, but if he just backs off, he stops with the vax mandate stuff, which has the potential to put us back in the soup to where we were in April of 2020. If he doesn't push the vax mandate, if he backs off of this stuff, we're going to have the capacity to have a burgeoning economy in spite of anything he does. And that's what's at stake. That's why we're fighting so hard on this vax mandate, because it's a violation, a constitutional violation of individual rights, but also it's suicidal economically. And so you look at it, it's not in the nation's interests, it's not in any individual's interests, and it's not a civil liberty. It's destruction of civil liberties. So it's bad on all fronts. But the piece where the people who are standing there saying, gee, we want this enforced radically, the piece they don't get is that no matter what you're thinking on the vax side, you throw 5-10% of the people out of the workforce, you know what happens? The economy crashes. We have 40% of the truckers not driving things around. You think the supply chain was bad? Supply chain is going to totally crumble if our trucking workforce isn't working. And the American Trucking Association says it's 40% of the truckers are not going to drive under those circumstances. That is destructive. And Joe Biden and his team know this. And the only thing I can conclude is it's deliberate. And that's why we have to stop this. That's why we have to get the Republicans in the Senate to figure it out, that they have to not fund the government. It only takes 41 people on this Senate to not fund the government. In February, they have to not fund the government if the vax mandates are maintained, because we cannot have Joe Biden destroying the economy out of a snit because people won't do what he says.
Well, thank you, Rick. And I agree with you. Sorry, I'm getting some feedback now for some reason. We'll close it out, folks. Thank you for joining us for an Americans for Limited Government live stream. Hold on. I'll put up our video. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you like what we're doing. Americans for Limited Government.